100,000 hours is no joke. At first might seem kind of daunting and intimidating and like, oh, okay, well, now that you put it that way, that's never going to happen. Well, and maybe it won't, but also maybe it doesn't need to. But don't lose hope. We're back. I've been in Japan for 2 weeks. I'm on 14 hours of jet lag. Let's make a video. I am so exhausted. Today, we talk about the 100,000 hours, the 100,000 hours, or why you can't speak like a native and why that's okay. You absolutely can in some capacities. You'll just never be a native speaker if you're not. Yeah, that checks out. Okay, first of all, welcome. I am Carp, your language teacher, professional person. I've been teaching language for over 12 years and I will continue to do so one way or another. Next, a brief and mediocre definition of fluency. Yes, mediocre indeed. We'll touch on that real quickly because we need some sort of basis for how we're going to treat that for the rest of the video. Next, how long does it take to be fluent? And how soon do you expect to be fluent as a language learner? That's a question for you. I don't know, I guess to ask yourself. When I get students, they all come to me with different ideas about fluency, about how long it's going to take, about how much time and effort they're going to have to put into their language. Everybody's got their own idea, but it's a different answer for everybody as well. Then we'll get to the 100,000 hours, what I really mean by that, why that number, why this is the thing. That 100,000 hours thing is all about perspective. Proficiency on fluency and on giving yourself the necessary time to become good at a language or to learn to acquire a language. Finally, our last point that we will have to close on is don't lose hope, because the perspective or the 100,000 hours thing that we're going to talk about today at first might seem kind of daunting and intimidating and like, oh, okay, well, now that you put it that way, that's never going to happen. Well, and maybe it won't, but also maybe it doesn't need to. We'll see what I mean by that, but don't lose hope. So it's the importance of being patient with yourself and with your progress in a language. Language is hard, takes a long time. You're gonna have to be realistic about it. A brief and mediocre definition of fluency. Like I said, there's way too many opinions on this. There are different opinions depending on what school you ask, depending on what university you ask. There are different definitions for workplaces. Does it mean basically that I can have a lighthearted conversation? Does it mean that I need to know really specific vocab? Way too many opinions, way too many definitions. Naturally, that means I'm gonna add one more, but really this is just so we all have one thing as a point of reference for this video. So what do I mean? To me, fluency is being able to comfortably and mostly accurately express oneself in virtually any situation in the target language. I say mostly accurately because most people don't even speak their native language 100% accurately all the time. So it's normal to have errors. And even if you aren't always extremely articulate in a language, you can always use the language to negotiate the meaning you need. Here's an example. Let's say I'm talking to somebody about computers and I want to tell them, oh, I just bought a new keyboard because my old one was broken or something. And in my new language, whatever I'm talking to them to, maybe I don't know the word for keyboard. So I could say something like, oh yeah, I just bought a new, well, you know, that thing you use to write on the computer. And then the other speaker would say, oh, a keyboard. Yes. So I just bought a new keyboard recently because my old one was broken. You see, this is not a failure of language. It's maybe one specific word that I didn't know, but I'm using the rest of my language to fill in the gaps or to gain the new knowledge or to negotiate the meaning with the other speakers. I still think that's a key feature of fluency. So it's not about knowing everything. It's about being able to comfortably navigate basically any situation. Okay, now let's talk time to fluency versus your expectations. And let's be reasonable. Language is hard, but your brain is smart. Yes, language is extremely complicated, but your brain is really good at them. That means even if it is challenging, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to become an extremely advanced, highly proficient, highly fluent speaker in a new language. Average time to fluency? Well, I have opinions on this. It depends on too many factors, person to person, to calculate a true average here. It depends on learning context, reasons for learning something, access to materials, prior knowledge, prior other language learning experiences. At the end of the day, here's what I think. Stop caring about how long. Okay, the people who are going to reach fluency and then beyond and improve and get extremely high proficiency, those people aren't really worried about how long it's going to take. The people who get there are the ones who just continue. They just keep going. That's really the key here. And we'll touch on this more in the video so I can remind you how important that is, but stop caring. Let's use my time to fluency for French and Spanish as examples here, and why it doesn't make sense to compare yourself to other people and really worry about this. For me, Spanish was my second language, of course, English my first, and then I started learning Spanish in high school. I would say until the time I was fluent in Spanish, that really comfortable communication where I could get other information within the language without having to switch out, without having communication failures, that fluency took me about 7 years. I think that was between high school classes, college classes, like playing online games in Spanish. I had a short about that recently, stuff like that. About 7 years. And then some travel opportunities on top of that. But then for French to that same level of fluency, it only took me maybe 3 or 4 years. Why is that? Well, I'd already had at least 4 or 5 years of Spanish at that point when I even started French. So I had all this prior knowledge to piggyback off of, and those two languages are extremely similar. And then when I was in college, I was basically studying French and education. So I had all this time dedicated to it. This is what I mean. There's too many factors person to person. It doesn't make sense to compare yourself. It doesn't make sense to say, well, the average time for this or that or the other, it doesn't matter. Your situation is always different. Your prior knowledge, your life, your understanding, every factor in your life and in your learning around a language is different from everybody else's. So don't worry about it. If you really want to get good at it, just keep going. So your expectations, I think, boil down to two things. It's going to take longer than you think because language is tough and you're basically learning forever. And don't expect. Just keep going. If you really want to get there, you'll get there by continuing. Now let's address the 100,000 hours. What do I mean by that? Let's gain some perspective by looking at your native language, okay? As an 18-year-old, let's say the day you turn 18, if you're awake for roughly 16 hours a day on average, and that for 365 days a year, I'm not even counting the leap years here, and you do that for those 18 years, you add all that up because you're using your native language basically constantly when you're awake. I would argue most of the time. You are reading, you're chatting, you're learning from family, you're listening to people, you're having all these diverse interactions at the store, at the movies, with your friends, at home, out in society. Language is everywhere. And it's kind of on blast, like for every waking moment, because even if you're not intaking things, you're having thoughts and you're constructing ideas on language. It is with you almost constantly. When you add up all that time, you've spent over 100,000 hours with your native language by the time you turn 18. Let that sink in. 100,000 hours is no joke. Even as just a 10-year-old, we know that by the time you're 18, you've already been a fluent speaker for a long time. Let's just say 10 years old. 10-year-olds still make tons of errors, a lot more than 18-year-olds at least. They've still spent, by the same math, about 58,000 hours. That's a lot more than you've done so far, right? The good news is that you don't have to do that much, but you just put this in perspective. If you take like a college class, let's say you take Spanish for 2 semesters, like a whole academic year in college. You have 2 16-week semesters and you get maybe 4 hours a week between time in class and time outside of class reading things or doing other Spanish work. By the end of 32 weeks, that's only 128 hours, roughly, okay? So how many times would you have to do that same academic year to catch up with a 10-year-old of a native language, right? I'm not literally going to divide it now. Feel free to do that at home for fun. It's a lot, but it's unrealistic. Like you can never catch up. The good news, like I said, is that you don't have to. You don't have to put in 58,000 hours to become fluent in a language or even extremely highly proficient and advanced in a language. Not 58,000 hours. It's still a ton. I would argue tens of thousands, maybe not 58,000. You don't have to for fluency. And that's why I don't want anybody watching this and wanting to learn a language, because of course that's what my whole darn channel is about, learning languages, and I love doing it, and I am trying to encourage you guys, the viewers, to do that. Don't let this crush you. Here's why, okay? Last part, don't lose hope. The trajectory of learning has its good times and its tough times, first of all. So while you're learning, you're gonna have times where you feel good about your skills and times you feel bad. And those two are going to be mixed together all the time. You'll have days where you read something and you're like, wow, I understood all that. I feel that I'm getting a lot of progress in my language. And then you'll have other days where you're like, I just read the same book yesterday, but I'm on a different chapter. And now I feel like I only understand half the page and I'm having to look a bunch of stuff up and I feel like crap. It happens and it's okay. But as far as the time thing goes, here's the really important part you need to take away. Let's talk about the good first squeeze. Getting returns on your time spent doing something. This is extremely true for language, but it's also true for many, many other skills that one might develop in life. Here's what I mean. When you start, let's say, a brand new language from scratch, you don't know anything, you have 0 hours in that new language. The first 1,000 hours is going to provide you with a massive amount of material and understanding and vocab, stuff like that. Because at that point, everything is new. It's all building on itself, and it can be really tough. But your skills in that language, your proficiency in that language is changing relatively pretty fast. It might not feel like it. The first 1,000 hours basically accounts for a massive amount of change in your language skill. But this is true for other things like sports, weightlifting. It's the same thing. The first big chunk of time that you spend on it is going to get you really far. And that's what I mean by the good first squeeze. Imagine you've got an orange, you cut it in half, you're going to make orange juice. The first time you give that orange a good squeeze, you will get most of the juice out. And you can keep squeezing it after that. And every time you do it, you'll get more juice out, but each time you will have to probably squeeze harder and you will get less juice. This is still relevant. So if I've spent 1,000 hours on Japanese, I've gone from 0 to 1,000. I've acquired a ton of new stuff and there's a bunch of things I can do now. But let's pretend I'm, 10,000 hours in now and I'm really, really good at it. For me to change now, for me to see a big difference in my proficiency level when I'm already way down the road, I have to put in a massive amount of effort to get a tiny amount of change. But the good news for beginners is that you don't have to move heaven and earth just to get to that fluent, comfortable level. It doesn't take forever. It's a lot of work, but it's not forever. And then later on, when it comes to pushing hard for very high proficiency, yes, if you're going the long game because you need extreme proficiency in a new language, like you're going to use your new language to go to school or you are in college for that, and then you're going to use it for a new career and maybe a specialized field, like you're going to be a bioengineer, but in a new language because it's going to be in a different country. Yes, you do need very specific vocab for that. You need really high proficiency in general. Those people know that they're in it for the long game. They know that they'll have to spend more time, but they also understand that if that's tied to their future, their career, these more important things, it's always an ongoing process and it will take a lot more, like exponentially more time to improve the further they get. For most people learning another language, though, you can, I'll say, get away with becoming fluent, which I make that sound like it's very little work. It's still a ton of work, but you can get away with that without spending forever and every waking minute of your day trying to amass more contact time with your language. So what it boils down to, be patient with yourself and be patient with your learning. Think of all the time that you've had your whole life poured into your native language and how good you have become at that. And then think of all the time that you have or maybe have not had yet in your new language and say, you're never going to get that same amount of time that you have in your native, but you're always going to try to work towards it. You're always working to get more time. You're working towards more practice. What it all comes down to is that you keep going. That is the ultimate key to success in many, many things, and many skills, and many fields, and especially true in language. The key is whether or not you continue. I said to not worry about your expectations. Don't worry about how long it's supposed to take to become fluent. If you really want that language proficiency and fluency, what it really comes down to is if you're finding time to build it into your schedule and that you continue. And even if it's a little bit and it takes a super long time, if you are continuing, you will get there. If you need results faster than that, you get serious about it and you get a tutor and maybe you have classes and you're studying on your own and you're reading and you're watching and you're doing all those things that you can do, it'll happen a lot sooner. But it still matters that you continue, because even if you do all that for a short time and then you give up, you won't get there. You might not ever amass 100,000 hours in a new language, but you can get to a very high level of fluency and proficiency without that and be able to enjoy the language all along the way. That's it for today. I hope that today's explanation has given you some perspective on your own learning and some grace and patience with yourself. You should be doing things with your language that make you want to continue studying. You have to enjoy your process. That will set you up for success. If you made it this far in the video, thank you. And let me know in the comments, what are the things that you do to try to get extra time with your language? What are the different things that you do to work it in your schedule and to play this long-term game? And also, what are the things that you choose that keep you highly motivated to continue your study? That's what I'm interested in hearing about. Thank you all for watching. I'm going to go take a nap because I'm still exhausted from my travels. I hope this one was helpful, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.